We are spending hundreds of billions of dollars in the United States to collect this data. It will be a national tragedy if we don't use this data to improve the practice of medicine, period.
So Atul, thank you for joining us today. I've always admired your work, and one thing that always stuck out was you're very unique in the terms of your diversity. I think you're a computer scientist and AI expert, so you're an engineer at heart. You're a physician, so you know how physicians think, you have the deep medical expertise, and then you're an entrepreneur, I think, in your blood. You've always been an entrepreneur, I believe, right? So can you talk about your journey?
Yeah, so I started as a computer scientist, but I knew I wanted to go to medical school. I wanted to make a difference in medicine. I was lucky to get into a program at Brown University that let me spend years there doing both of those. Started a company along the way during all that training and got bitten by that bug that we can make a difference, not just by working in an academic world, but we got to go beyond just writing papers. We can start companies and deliver services and products. So I've always been on both sides. I then trained as a pediatric endocrinologist, so taking care of kids with diabetes and growth problems. Now I'm thrilled to be at UCSF running this new Baker Computational Health Science Institute, recruiting people like me, and as a chief data scientist of the University of California Health System. It's amazing we have health systems now with data scientists, right? That's the new world that we're now in. It's just an amazing time to be in this field. Everything looks perfect in retrospect. But I encourage a lot of kids now to do this kind of hybrid training. Some engineering discipline and something in biomedicine is really what the world needs today.
So was it obvious to you from a long time ago that data is the key to some of these topics?
Yeah, I think certainly we knew what computers could do in terms of compute. I think the data really took off for me in the mid-90s when the Human Genome Project started. And it started in a way that you knew it was going to complete. That at some point we're going to have DNA sequences on individuals. We were certainly in the middle of an imaging revolution with radiology, MRI, CAT scans. So we were definitely surrounded by data, but we were just imagining back then what it was going to be. I think we're truly drowning in it now.
Yeah, it's amazing how the exponential growth of data just keeps going. I've heard people talk about that's the feature of exponential growth, which is you don't realize it's big until it's big and then it's too late. That's like the whole point, because going backwards, it's also exponentially getting smaller.
That's right. I mean, exponential growth in both ways is really interesting. Certainly data is doubling any number of years, pick some unit, 2 years, 4 years. But that also means if you go backwards, half of all the data we have was just generated in the last 2 to 4 years. So it's not really even old data, it's fresh data. It's not stale data, and certainly there's no difference in health and healthcare. If anything, it's probably growing faster than most disciplines where we collect data.
So would you say data and the problems you're talking about, does that describe your current focus, your research, what you're passionate about these days?
Yeah, I'm certainly, I love using data that's out there. My passion is in this area called precision medicine. I know it's a buzzword, but to me, we're going to be customizing the medical care we deliver to individuals based on measurements we're going to get from those individuals, whether biologic or wearables or behavior or preferences. And then we're going to end up with a lot of those kinds of measurements on a lot of people. And more importantly, we have to figure out what are all the health outcomes of these folks? What are we delivering in terms of healthcare?
That's a very inspiring vision for all of us. I think that's why we all work in this area. Can you talk about a few examples of how data, precision medicine have come together to produce better care, better lifestyle, better health for someone?
Yeah, I think the best example of where precision medicine really hits the rubber hits the road is probably in cancer, where it's now becoming more and more routine to get an entire sequence of a cancer. Based on those sequences, there are certain drugs that we are now able to use. And the FDA has approved those drugs only when those specific DNA sequences are present in the cancer. So that's coming full circle, where we have very customized drugs going after very customized findings in these cancers. Patients will benefit if we can get more of that to happen.
It's amazing. We first heard about the DNA, the secret of life problem was solved, And then, so sequencing your DNA was the beginning, it turns out. Then transcriptome, and metabolome, and other omes that I can't even pronounce probably. And it feels like it's just a series of mountains. Every time you cross a mountain, there's like more ahead of you.
Yeah.
So it's probably a never-ending journey, I imagine, right?
Yeah, I think as scientists, we're never happy with the data we have, right? We would always want more. That being said, we've gotten a lot out of the Genome Project, right? A lot of companies launched, a lot of careers made, a lot of jobs and industries built from scratch, and a lot of science delivered. But I think probably we were thinking the DNA had more of a role in one's, let's say, destiny in medicine. And that's undoubtedly not the case. I think the aphorism most people are using now is that perhaps zip code is more important than genetic code. There are big differences in where individuals live, their access to healthcare, their access to even the ability to exercise and proper diet, nutrition, and probably those aspects, those social determinants of health, are probably much more important than the genetic side. Now, there are going to be extremes on both sides, where there are certain DNA changes that lead to a very severe disease 100% of the time. But most chronic diseases are probably not like that. There are still social and behavioral things that we can do and perhaps influence in ourselves to make a difference in whether we get a disease or not.
The science here is all amazing, and there's so much to do. But maybe the next question is, how does that translate into the actual care that we get? How does it affect how patients, how does it affect prevention? Can you talk about those kind of how to go from here to there kind of questions?
Yeah, so we're in this exciting revolution of precision medicine, customizing healthcare. But at the same time, it's in the context of what some would say is a burdensome healthcare ecosystem in the United States. Certainly, it's a competitive system where health systems compete with each other, pharmaceutical companies compete with each other, payers compete with each other. And so that competition sometimes leads to some efficiencies and some inefficiencies. Certainly, many people have written about the cost of the healthcare system in the United States compared to other countries. And then in the middle of that, trying to fold in precision medicine seems almost like an impossibility, how to make that happen. I think precision medicine, though, has to be about more than just where we can use a drug or procedure or device. It also needs to be about when we shouldn't use a drug or procedure or device. If we see that a particular cancer is not going to respond to an expensive drug, we probably shouldn't use that drug. But actually, that's going to take courage. And I've said this before in various scenarios. I think the hardest part of precision medicine is going to be having the courage to say, no, we shouldn't do this, we shouldn't do that. That courage is really tough right now to find in a world where still we try to go all the way. I think physicians go into a field like medicine because they genuinely want to help people. And given all the information they have, they do what they believe is best in the interest of the patients and their families to really help in any way they can. But I think there are still structural issues as well. I think there's a new world, what people are calling real world evidence. For example, when drugs are actually approved, when they're actually in use, do drugs, devices, and procedures, do they actually work in patients after they're approved? Do they work as well as we thought during the trial that got the drugs approved? I think that experience, real world experience with drugs, procedures, devices, I think has been hidden so far. And I think in a new world, we're going to surface that data and deliver it to patients and providers, healthcare providers and physicians to really perhaps make better informed decisions.
That's great to hear you say that. As you know, at Samson Catalyst Fund, this area of RWD, RWE, real world data, real world evidence is now one of our major themes and what we look for. And question that people often have is like, what's new about that? There's always been real world.
Yeah.
So do you think much has changed in the last few years to kind of accelerate things?
Oh, a lot has changed. I think the biggest change for physicians, for the healthcare ecosystem, is the deployment of these electronic health records. You know and I know because we see our doctors once in a while, but for anyone, your doctor is using an electronic health record because you probably see the back of their head. They're typing usually during the visits. That's an electronic health record. These are very expensive software systems. Some systems, healthcare systems, have paid more than $1 billion And I call this data the most expensive data in America now because we pay physicians to enter all that in. I think that data, when harnessed, put into AI, machine learning, to learn what's working and not working in medicine, I think that's the new real world evidence that I'm talking about.
So you're talking about using data to overcome inefficiencies, create more opportunities in healthcare. And it sounds like it's going, I mean, there's some kind of bumps along the way. What else do you think are like really big inefficiencies that need to be overcome in healthcare?
Yeah, so I think one big inefficiency that a lot of Silicon Valley types never see is that they think the entire healthcare system works together really well. And they forget that we're a competitive system. So neighboring healthcare systems often compete with each other for patients. And so where that manifests itself sometimes is there's a dialogue about why don't healthcare systems share data with each other. We often don't because we compete with each other, right? We put up billboards next to each other to try to get patients to come to our center.
Doctors are human too, right?
Absolutely, and so are the healthcare systems. They're looking for business. So healthcare systems don't really share data often because they're trying to, it would be like asking, let's say, Samsung and Apple to share their customer lists, right? That probably wouldn't happen. That's the kind of equivalent here. But from the outside perspective, a Silicon Valley engineer or entrepreneur never really sees that competition. They don't realize that these are competitive. So the reason we don't often share data isn't a technical problem. These are political and sociological problems because we have a competitive healthcare system here.
Yeah. So maybe one approach that I think many of us discuss is really the consumer, the user, the patient, the person owns the data. It's about that person. And so that person should have full access, rights, protection, privacy. So, and another thing that we talk about is the 99% of the time outside the formal clinical system.
That's right.
Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so ownership and rights over data are complex issues. And actually in the United States, every state has their own set of laws around that. But there are a couple of truisms here that I would say. Certainly patients should have the right to get all the medical data that exists on them. And I don't think any health system in the country has a problem with that, has never had a problem with that. They might not have had the technical means to deliver that healthcare data. Now we have federal standards that we can use to export data, and I think we're getting tools now on the patient side to receive that kind of data. So I think no health system has a problem with that. But the health systems also need to have that data as well, right? We have a responsibility to take care of those patients when they come back. We need to know what we did with those patients. And more importantly, we have to continually improve what we're doing in medicine, right? To reach operational excellence. If there are problems, if there are errors, we need to know that and fix our own problems. So we also need to use that data. So ownership and rights, I don't tend to use those words, but I tend to think about it in terms of responsibilities. I think we have a responsibility as a healthcare system to give the data on patients to patients, but we also have to improve what we're doing.
Can you talk also more about that data, which is not so much clinical data, but lifestyle, wearable, phone, those 99% as we call it?
Yeah, so certainly there's a lot to one's life than what happens in the clinic or in the hospital. And I would definitely agree, most of those other aspects of one's life probably have more to do than the little few things that we do in medicine. Everything from nutrition to weight to exercise. Certainly these are preventative aspects as well. So a lot of that data is captured now increasingly with devices, wearables and smart devices. I think it's still questionable how much the medical system wants that data, or even more blunt, if we're ready to deal with all that data. Another thing that surprises Silicon Valley entrepreneurs sometimes is that we don't have doctors waiting, just sitting there by computer waiting for all this wearable data to come in. By no means is there someone just tasked with getting this kind of data. So I think we're going to start to collect this data. Certainly more individuals want this data on themselves, but we need better tools to help the individuals at that point with getting to a better lifestyle, not just collecting this data. Let's get more actionable data, actionable instructions to individuals on what to do with all this data.
Yeah, it seems like one big difference between medicine or healthcare compared to, let's say, advertising or other kind of tech-enabled industries is that in, say, advertising, it's okay to use the data, pick out the salient individuals and target them. And if everything else fails but a few yield result, that's great.
That's right.
In healthcare, you don't have that luxury
That's
because
right.
you can actually hurt people.
It's actually never, it's not as much of an extreme. Advertising is a little bit easier, let's say, because you're going to have to show some ad, and you got maybe a microsecond to decide what ad you're going to show, let's say on a website. And the worst case scenario is you're going to show an ad that maybe has no relevance to the individual. Probably most ads don't get clicked on anyway, let's say. What I would say is medicine is more like other fields, like getting your car fixed or repaired, getting your taxes done. These are still very engineering oriented, very data oriented, yet there's still humans in the loop there, right? Taxes to me are the best analogy for healthcare. When life is simple, you don't have a lot of deductions, yeah, download the software, you can fill it out, you don't need a human there. When life gets complicated, you have a lot of deductions, maybe you're one of the lucky few in Silicon Valley, you sold a company, all of a sudden the software isn't going to help you. You're going to need a human to do that. And you know what's amazing? That human is probably using software. But it's just easier to communicate with the human instead of trying to figure out how to get the software to work. And healthcare is the same way. When you're healthy, probably software tech tools are going to help. But when you're sick, it's really tough to find time to type in all this stuff into computers and get some advice.
Yeah, this is a fantastic point. This is the theme is how to augment people, not replace them. It's not an either or.
That's right.
Humans by themselves are limited. Machines by themselves are not to be trusted, basically. And humans and machines the right way. Can you talk about some examples of where that's going well, like human getting superpowers from the machines?
Yeah, so the superpower phrase I first heard from my good friend and mentor, Zach Kohane at Harvard Medical School. So the idea of superpowers, so think about MRI and CAT scans, gave physicians or surgeons superpowers to look inside a body without cutting open a body, right? And beautiful pictures. And so think about superpowers that technology and AI in that set are going to give physicians a power, perhaps to look into the future. Where is this patient going to be in 90 days? Or I'm going to synthetically try all these different drugs. Which one is the patient going to respond to the best? So that kind of power is a superpower that computers are going to give you. So it's not going to be doctors versus computers. It's going to be doctors with computers versus doctors without computers, right? Who refuse to use computers. That's the real dichotomy here. It's never going to be just doctors and computers competing with each other. Computers are not going to do that. Maybe when things are very simple, healthy, of course, technology can do a lot. But for once you have anything wrong, a physician's still going to be part of the loop.
So you've talked about inefficiencies. You talked about how to let humans and AI cooperate and augment each other. Can you talk about, given if you put your entrepreneurial hat on, what are the ways that someone might think about how can they change things, how can they improve things by starting the next great company?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's still a lot of unmet need across the entire healthcare ecosystem. But what I recommend to entrepreneurs is really to think about one piece first of the ecosystem. Don't try to fix the entire global problem. It's really tough to get more than one type of customer at the same time if you're a company. So for example, I think patients still need a lot of help. We're measuring a lot of tools in healthy individuals. We still don't have great decision support tools for patients or individuals on how to improve their health. We have a couple companies there. I think we can get to more of those. I think patients with chronic diseases still need a lot of help. Given that we can now deliver lab tests to them through these federal standards, what should a patient do next, given this result or that result? We don't have any tools there. I think physicians are frustrated with electronic health records. There could probably be layers or replacements for some of those. Those are going to be expensive, enterprise level sales, but I think those are going to be needed. I think payers need a lot of help in trying to figure out how to manage populations because certain costs are higher in just a very few number of individuals, whereas the costs are lower in others. So can you predict who might actually be needing a lot of healthcare? And how do you tell if they're getting appropriate healthcare? So I think picking one of those, whichever one appeals to an entrepreneur, is the way to go. But trying to tackle more than one is really tough. It's really tough to have that first sale when you're thinking about fixing the entire country's problems.
Right. I mean, 3 to 4 trillion, I think, for healthcare costs in the
That's
U.S.
Right.
Even like picking a very specific problem is probably a very large market.
That's right.
Healthcare is probably it's not one market. It's maybe 50 or 100 markets,
That's right.
And this kind of goes back also to our first topic, which is diversity.
Yeah.
Because you have to have medical expertise, you have to have software expertise, understand business, understand different stakeholders. So in fact, would you want to comment about what kind of people do you need in a successful startup? What kind of skill sets, backgrounds?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I think the success and failure of a lot of these types of healthcare ecosystem startups really depend on the people involved. I think one key differentiator I see between startups is how much actual medical expertise do they have within the company. Now, not every startup, not every really new startup can afford medical doctors. But when I evaluate startup companies, let's say on the health system side that are trying to partner with us, one quick decision I make is, are they going to teach me more than I'm going to have to teach them? Because if there's no medical expertise in the company, it gets really tough. Because probably the first 10 or 50 or 100 things they find are things we already knew about for years, and we have no way to address.
Yeah.
So that's a big difference, is get as much medical help as you can get. It doesn't always mean a medical doctor. It could be a nurse practitioner. The more of that kind of help, the better. But of course, you need people who've been on the payer side, maybe the pharma side. The more of that kind of people would experience in the different components, the stronger the company's going to be.
Yeah, I mean, I think the pattern recognition we have is when you see a team that's got the right kind of balance and complement, there's this deep industry specific, in this case, clinical or payer expertise. And then there are some very, very strong technical people, because often it's going to be some software automation. And then there's, of course, there's this very customer-oriented person who's not all about, so the company's not all about, solving the medical problem only, but also about making money, which we care about.
That's right.
So that balance is, when you see that, it's a beautiful thing to watch. You go, I want to invest in that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
When a team is that harmonious, it just screams out for funding in some ways, right? That they're going to do good things. But you can't be missing one of those components, right? It's really obvious when a company is missing those kinds of components. To be really concrete here for potential viewers, I think we have a lot of platform companies, tech platform, let's say in AI, machine learning, with very little verticalization in healthcare. Those companies are really tough to work with because they really don't know the first thing about the data we have. They don't really know the first thing about the challenges and the pain points we have. Learning pain points is really the new wisdom in Silicon Valley. The sooner, and it takes time, it takes frustration to learn what are the actual pain points in medicine. But boy, when you learn those pain points and have something to address them, I think there's a lot of success there.
So on this pain point question, one thing that's been so fascinating for me, I've been looking at healthcare for about 7 years. Before that, I knew nothing about healthcare. But watching it for the last 7 years, it's very clear that the successful companies, they don't just focus on consumers, because consumers don't pay for anything.
That's right.
Many start by focusing on the very clinical, the systemic issues. Could be payers, could be providers, could be physician decision support. But basically, the last several years, they began to realize a big opportunity is expanding towards the consumer. And because that's how you scale, that's how you kind of empower people, that's how you get the right amount of data. So there's that interesting transition, which is you're crossing this wall, right?
That's right.
Between the system and the people outside.
I mean, there are really, again, I hate to draw false kind of lines, but there are really two types of patients in the healthcare system. They're the healthy and the sick. And I think the healthy are healthy, and they love to stay healthy. And there's a set of tools and services and devices that we can try to get to healthy, to try to keep them as healthy as long as possible. And those might be around diet and exercise and fitness and things like that. Maybe some preventative services in terms of looking for diseases that might be hiding, things like that. That's one kind of population where they're healthy. They need a specific set of products, services. They might not even know what they want yet, but you could probably engineer things for them. But the minute you're sick, a patient is sick, a population is sick, everything changes for them. It's more about how to deal with the illness. It's not going to be about tech-enabled sneakers. It's going to be about, how do I get rid of this disease? How do I manage the rest of my life with this disease?
That's so true. Your life changes in those
Your life
cases.
changes. So, what we're thinking about direct to consumer in one way is very different than direct to consumers that have a medical problem. And I think we keep thinking they're the same. At least entrepreneurs think they're the same, but very different.
So Atul, all these great ideas really all revolve around the data. There's so much data. We're swimming in data. We're like data exhaust everywhere. And now, of course, the big topic for the world today is about what about this data if it's used in the wrong way, in the wrong hands, for the wrong purpose, privacy. Can you talk about your thoughts there?
Yeah, so I think certainly we have a lot of data, but we're also in a context where there's more regulation on data. The Europeans, for example, have passed legislation recently on how data should be used. And in some interesting way, in the United States, we're lucky, and I'm going to use this word lucky, that we've had HIPAA for 20 years now. And so we've already had legislation and rules on how we should properly use this kind of data. What HIPAA says is that, first of all, patients should have a right to their data. Okay, that's unambiguous. And it's our responsibility as healthcare systems to deliver that data. But if we're going to interchange data with each other, it's really governed and controlled how we need to do that. Now, if we want to use this data for operational improvement, quality improvement, or research, it's very dictated how we should do those types of studies. Of course, we have to use data safely and respectfully, but I think we also see it as our duty to use that data to actually improve healthcare. We are spending hundreds of billions of dollars in the United States to collect this data. It will be a national tragedy if we don't use this data to improve the practice of medicine, period.
Would you say that the challenges to be overcome, are they more technological? Are they more kind of a business and practice? So for the entrepreneurs who are thinking about how to solve this problem, what should they think about?
I think this actually really frustrates a lot of entrepreneurs, that the technical aspects are not the hard aspects here. It is the sociological, the political, the business world that one really needs to understand, that really get the solutions deployed.
Very complicated ecosystem with different incentives, so designing the one that lines them up is very difficult.
It's very hard. Even in one of the parties, say a healthcare system like University of California or Kaiser or Stanford, there are competing interests even in the one. You have some individuals who are tasked with delivering as efficient care as possible to certain populations. So that means, maintaining costs or lowering costs. But at the same time, another group who is only paid if they do procedures. So there's an incentive there, whether it's real or not, to do more. That's in one entity, right? So how does an entrepreneur navigate all that, right? It's not a technical challenge. It's really learning that sociology.
So on that last point about treating versus prevention, and so how does the healthcare system think about that? How much should we prioritize prevention versus the best therapy once you have something?
Yeah, so I think prevention is important. Don't get me wrong. I think there are certain preventative aspects that we know that we still don't use enough, whether that's imaging or colonoscopy, so mammographies, blood tests. Some of these have been demonstrated to make a difference, and we should use those more and deploy those more widely. I'm really proud at UCSF, for example, to be part of an organization rolling out cancer screening to all the residents of San Francisco, not just our patients at UCSF, a project called SF-CAN. So cancer screening is important in that way. But at the same time, our hospitals have many patients that have a disorder that's just not preventable. Now, again, I don't want to be morbid here. I'm going to say this with a smile, but we're all going to die someday, right? And actually, in the United States, it's illegal to die without a disease. They got to put something on your death certificate. So what is it going to be, right, in the end? I don't know. So not everything is 100% preventable. We're all going to die. What do you want to die of in some ways is a question. That being said, I think we all want to live as healthy of a life as we can.
What we're talking about here then is as technology advances, you can do more and more. Of course, you can never fully prevent anything, but it is amazing what advances have taken place. Can you talk more about, so we talked a little bit about the barriers in terms of inefficiencies and coordination. There's some fundamental things in terms of actually improving the essence of the treatment, the essence of prevention because of technology advances.
Yeah.
Can you talk about data and the role of that?
Yeah, so I think we are surrounded by a bunch of startup companies now looking at trying to prevent like next generation prevention. So for example, can you detect cancer that might be incredibly tiny in one's body by looking at circulating factors in the blood like DNA and other things. So those are very tech and data and sequencing, DNA sequencing based companies. I think we're going to see more of those. Maybe they're going to be imaging based. But these types of companies are already having challenges. We've had a notable couple failures in the past couple months because they're trying to get patients or consumers to buy this directly. It's a catch-22 for these kinds of startups because they got to prove they make a difference, but at the same time, they're trying to get customers, right? It's a tough world. So it's hard to charge for something in the end. It's hard to charge a lot of money for something that we don't really know is going to make a difference in preventing. So where do you get the dollars from then? Well, these are venture capitalists or investors that have to then fund those companies for a while until they make a difference and convince payers to pay for these types of tests. So that's a challenge. Another challenge for next generation prevention is going to be, what do you do when you know you have a problem, right? Does it mean we do more tests? If you know you have a little itty bitty cancer somewhere in your body, do we have a drug we could use safely to try to knock out that cancer, to prevent that cancer? I don't think we have a drug at all right now. So do you just create 30 years of angst that there's something growing in your body? Or what do you do when you know that that's coming? So I'm not sure these companies are really thinking about an actionable next step yet. Not really clearly defined at all. But the paying and the action, those are the two challenges here.
So at Samsung, as you know, we are very focused on how to use technology for good, how to use data for good. But these examples you give are perfect because even in medicine, even in healthcare, where you think it's kind of simple, it's like make people healthier, it's actually very complicated.
It's complicated.
And even like a very positive thing like, let's say, predicting the outcome of your disease progression, that could be used for good and for bad. So do you feel like we're coming together as an industry, as a society, to really address these questions head on?
I think the data is going to help get society to address these kinds of cost issues and inequity, but it's necessary but not sufficient. I think society has to deal with these issues broadly than just the data and the computational side. We spend some large portion of our gross domestic product on healthcare now, 18% or something like that. But what is the right number there? I don't know what the right number is there. Certainly, we know many countries spend much less than that. And we certainly know our outcomes aren't so great. Our healthcare is delivered in a very lumpy way right now. Not everyone gets the same healthcare in the United States. That's clear. So I think we, as a society, still have a lot of inequities to deal with, to address, to come up with solutions for. The data can help, but it's going to need more than just data.
Do you feel like there's enough dialogue among the different constituencies and different segments of society, different parts of industry? Is there enough dialogue to think about these ethical and difficult choices together?
I think the dialogue is there. The dialogue has always been there. But we've evolved to a certain point in the healthcare system that's really tough to figure out how to make a meaningful difference now. We have a lot of innovative business models coming. We have large companies now working together to try to address their own healthcare costs. We have healthcare systems now partnering with each other, like University of California, trying to agglomerate on that side. We have pharmaceutical companies acquiring each other. So I think we're trying to one clear difference, one clear future state I see for the healthcare system in the United States is we're going to see more of these, I'm putting in quotes, mergers and acquisitions, right? They're not strict mergers and acquisitions, but we're going to see more agglomeration to reach scale. Whereas healthcare often has been a very local problem, I think we're going to start to see larger units come together. Maybe that'll lead to efficiencies, but certainly it will lead to more dialogue.
And as we think about those solutions, I think we always have to think about, why are we doing this? In the end, it's for all of us. It's not because of some technology objective. It's about using data for good. And one key thing that's kind of emerging is the inequality aspect of data can be used for bad, or data is not being used for good for everyone. Can you talk about healthcare for, let's say, urban areas versus developing or poor or rural areas. How might you think about that?
Yeah, I think so. One unique aspect of the healthcare industry and ecosystem in the entire world is that even though it's a competitive system, we have payers fighting with pharma, fighting with healthcare providers, is that we're all in it to do good, right? We're all in it to do better for patients. That's a universal truism. But we might have differing ideas on how to get there, right? We might think this is the important thing to do, but a payer might say that's the important thing to do. So we might differ, but the goal is universal that way. And I think we're going to have different solutions for folks who are in incredible areas like Silicon Valley that might need improvement in health, certain aspects of disease. That's going to be very different than bringing up a rural area from no health care. I think technology might be able to help that area in a very different way than it does here. So we're going to have, that's really critical why we need a diversity of solutions and a diversity of entrepreneurs thinking across the world. Not just, I hate to say it, Silicon Valley solutions for Silicon Valley patients. How far are we going to actually get in the world if that's all we're able to develop?
So going upstream from the healthcare system, as you know, Samsung has a lot of interest on the biopharma side. We have 2 drug companies, manufacturing and also for biosimilars. So we're very interested in what's going to happen in the future in terms of better therapy and maybe even the discovery side, the fundamental science that's going to drive the new technologies and new treatments. Can you talk about what's exciting there on the data and from the data angle? Yeah,
so I think it's really important. The FDA just recently put out more guidance on this process of biosimilars. And so a biosimilar is really in this area of biological therapeutics. As you know, they're very expensive to make. They're very expensive for patients and for payers. And the FDA now has more regimented guidelines as to how competitors can come in with similar molecules, biosimilars. That's a legal process that's taken years to actually reach this state. But now that we've reached that state, I think we should, if this is a fair marketplace, I think the more companies that we have entering, it's going to be better for the entire healthcare system. That being said, these are not neutral types of movements, right? Every time a competitor comes in, an established company does worse. That is the nature of competition. So I think it's impressive. I think it is important. I think it's absolutely needed for more competition in every space, in devices and pharmaceuticals, but certainly in biosimilars. These are expensive drugs. I think now that the FDA has put out guidelines on that, how we can use real-world data to get those drugs closer to approval and actual use, I think that could be, is it going to fix the entire US healthcare system? No, it's not at that level, but I think it's going to make a meaningful difference for some expensive drugs.
So Atul, I think biosimilars are very interesting because they're a very essential part of the life cycle, in my opinion, because you have to have a phase where you're developing the most advanced drugs and also get the returns from that so to kind of incent the next generation of drugs to come. But then at some point, you really want to make it accessible to broad swaths of people, and that's what biosimilars are doing. So can you talk about what else could be standing in the way of that? Are we in the U.S. doing the right thing compared to Europe, compared to other areas?
Yeah, I mean, so I think, without a doubt, I think it's hard to say biosimilars are a problem. I think biosimilars are really absolutely critical to lowering healthcare costs. I think the challenge, though, one has to see from the outside perspective, is that there are going to be companies hurt by biosimilars, right? Including companies around us in the Silicon Valley area. Many of our biotech companies develop some of these drugs. They're going to, if they see a new competitor, it will hurt them. So we have to know that that's going to happen, right? An entrant in this field or any field in the healthcare ecosystem has to know that sometimes you bring something in, there's going to be a party that's not going to like what you're doing and is actually going to try to fight it. These solutions are not going to be universally adopted. I think the biotech industry has been trying to fight biosimilars, but it's still an important aspect. Now, going beyond biosimilars, I think we're going to have similars in many areas, right? We've had generic drugs for a long time, and pharmaceutical companies have been fighting those. But if you think about just even what we do in a healthcare system, a primary care visit, You could argue we're going to have tech similars to that, right? The healthiest of the healthy might be treatable with just pure tech and telemedicine types of tools. A healthcare system like mine isn't going to like that, right? We're going to lose business. We're going to lose revenue. Look, I love all my friends who start companies here in Silicon Valley, but it's still kind of naive sometimes to think we all get along in the healthcare ecosystem. We do actually, there is still a fight for business. So new entrants with any product or service anywhere in this ecosystem have to identify who's not going to like this and really start to build a business strategy around that.
So Atul, this biosimilars example is really a great example of the response to this increase in price of drugs, which is in stark contrast with where I come from, which is semiconductors. You have this thing called Moore's law, price dropping inexorably until you scale to like 1 million times the price performance.
Yeah. And
in drugs, it's kind of going the opposite way.
Yeah, I think so. In drugs, the cost to develop a drug itself is a wide range. So for example, the cost to develop a drug that really makes a difference for a brand new disease where there's no drug, I think the FDA level of proof is much lower. The first drug to come in to address a rare disease or a childhood disease probably is not going to take as much to develop, but there's some basic biology that still has to get solved. Remember, this is not an engineering discipline like making chips. This is biology. We still don't know how these things work, yet we're still trying to fix them, right? We don't have infinite resolution and everything. So I think certain aspects, drugs that we make to try to compete with existing drugs, with existing targeted disorders, yeah, those are getting more expensive because the trials needed to show any kind of meaningful difference might need tens of thousands of individuals. To set up that kind of clinical trials infrastructure is just very costly around the world. So I think there are still ways. I do not believe it has to cost a fortune to make a drug. I use this phrase called garage biotechs. I'm looking for the next Genentech, the next Amgen to start in a garage, just like Apple and HP and many other companies starting garages around here. I think we can get to garage biotechs. Of course, it's a hard road to get a drug all the way out into the clinic, but I think it doesn't have to be so costly to get started. I think data is going to help us get there.
So we've talked about this many times. We get excited. As you know, Samsung brings the mobile, the semiconductor, and kind of deep healthcare expertise in their one company. And there seems to be so many opportunities for us to work together with all the entrepreneurs outside to attack things like the trial, making the trial much easier to run, more efficient, leveraging consumers and mobile. What do you think about that?
Yeah, look, Samsung has global reach in many different aspects of business, of just individuals' lives. I think there are these targeted areas that need help. I like working with the Samsung Catalyze program to try to identify people with those solutions and see what they can bring. So I think there's a lot more that needs to be invented. I think we have an incredible need for entrepreneurs. And I think sometimes they need just a little bit of guidance, a little bit of help, and probably a lot of money to get those solutions out there. But we still need those solutions badly.
Yeah. Atul, it's been super fun to do this fly through to the enormous healthcare system with you. But maybe you can end with, if you had to give a few tips to an aspiring entrepreneur who wants to make a difference in the healthcare system, what would you say?
I would give an aspiring entrepreneur 3 tips. The first is train as much as you can afford. Now, not everyone can go to college, certainly graduate school, medical school, all other schools we have out there, but train as much as you can afford is the first one. It does not hurt to just get deeper expertise. The second is get as much help as you can, especially from medical professionals, nursing. Don't be afraid of talking to those folks, especially in the tech areas around the country. Those health professionals want to help startups. They're tired of startups doing the wrong thing. They want to help and get that help. And the third is truly go after the unmet need, no matter how deep it is. Don't just build another app that does the same thing the other 100 apps do already in an app store. Take time, learn from the experts, learn what the pain points are, and then truly develop solutions for those pain points. The rewards will be there for entrepreneurs if you go in that direction.
Well, thank you very much. Those are great tips, and it looks like you've lived that advice yourself.
Trying every day, but thank you very much for having me here
Thank you for joining us. Look forward to seeing what amazing things come out of your lab and your work in the future.
Thank you.